So one of the things that happens during the recruitment process is that you have this what we would term cast of characters, accountants, well-meaning family members. And I just wondered if you had any general thoughts about that for someone who's looking at a franchise.
I mean, I think you said this to me once that, would you buy a house without taking your wife along, Amrit? And I barely buy a shirt without taking my wife along. So I think really it's saying bring everyone along. I'm always very big on that, to say whoever the decision makers are, whether it's your partner, your spouse, your parent, your friend, whoever that person is, bring them along. Take them to the meeting and really try to understand, well, what are the questions they've got, what are the questions you've got? Because when you try to go home and deliver that information in the same level of excitement that you received it in the room, it never quite sort of transpires in the same way. So I think it's really important. I mean, my thing is, I tend to say, I won't really do the meeting unless you bring everyone along, because I think it's so important. Again, having been in the other person's shoes myself, I think it's so important to take everyone along. I remember I met one of my now competitors as a prospective franchisee back in 2012, and I met a bunch of them, but in this particular instance, I drove up with my dad, and we had this Frandev meeting, and it was a wonderful meeting, and he was excited and I was excited, but it gave me this level of reassurance, because I thought, oh gosh, he's run businesses and he's got an opinion, his opinion really matters to me, and he's supportive of this decision and he understands it. And it prior to that meeting felt really difficult, because I was talking about something, I was excited about something, and he's like, okay, well, sounds like a scam to me, and so on. So I think bringing the cast of characters along is really important.
And sometimes, people will get an accountant to review the P&L, and the accountant will go, well, this is not right, and caution the prospective candidate against proceeding. How would you tackle that?
I think really I'd like to understand who the accountant is if I was the prospective franchisee. So I am pretty big now on working with people that have experience in specific sectors. So within the accountancy market, for example, taking that example, you've got people that, most accountants are generalists. They won't say, well, I work on X. So I'd be really interested to say, well, how much knowledge and how many businesses have you worked on that are in the home care market specifically? Not nursing homes, not whatever else, home care. And at that point, if you're telling me that the numbers here don't stack up to the other 100 businesses that you've looked at, fair enough. That kind of means something. If you are comparing my home care business to the 3 restaurants that you also work with, it's apples and pears. It doesn't really make any sense, and the margins are different, and so on. What I really want, and what we work on, we have a supplier panel of accountants, but we really want to work with accountants to understand, well, this is the gross profit margin, this is how much you should be spending on care workers, this is when you should be worried because you're spending too much or too little on mileage. This is how much your rent is associated to your top line revenue, or your office staff is X percentage of your top line revenue. I want someone that understands the metrics, and at that point they can tell me EBITDA, your profit level, is too low or nonsensical or whatever it might be.
Just describe EBITDA for the audience.
So literally, the profit before tax. And amortization, whatever the heck that means, right? But it is profit before tax, which is, really quite an interesting piece. And that's the thing that we're often going to be looking at, to say, how do we make that number as healthy as possible? And more often than not, the thing that will impact that is top line. It is how much I'm charging. So I was working with a franchisee. Remember, one of my early doors franchisees, wonderful guy, and when I talk about people that follow a model and teachable, just superb. Yeah. And I sat down with him in our old office in West Hampstead, and we were going through. He brought this spreadsheet along, and I was getting into it, and great, but he was charging about £19 an hour and paying out like £12 or £13 an hour, and we're looking at the cash flow. And bear in mind, this is now almost 5 years ago. We're looking at the cash flow, and it's sort of taking 3-4 years to get positive. And I said, well, we've got two options here, basically, because everything else you're sitting on, and everything else is kind of fine, right? It fits the model. You either pay care workers a lot less, but that's not something that you want to do, or you absolutely beef up the top line. And I then said, we then sort of looked at it and said, well, okay, what does that look like at £30 an hour, for example, or £25 an hour? And even at £25 an hour, the numbers changed, and within 8 months, he would be cash flow positive. And at £30, it would happen in like something like 3 months or something. And so, that really was like a light bulb moment, because we sort of dug in, we looked at the numbers, and then we sort of went through and said, well, okay, who have we got here, and what could we do with that? What is a conversation that we could have? Do we send them a letter? Do we pick up the phone to them? And do we, have what is the discussion that we have with these people? And 3 months later, I went to his office and said, let's have a check-in about this, and we booked that in when we had that first meeting, and he transformed it. He was at an average of 25, some all the way up at £40, prorated out, and it was just wonderful. And so he went from being quite sort of worried about his situation to really optimistic, and has just... Also, what it gave him was a level of trust in us to say, these guys understand and they're looking at my bottom line. So for me, that unit level economics, the profitability for the franchisee, is supremely important. I'll get together with my management team at least once a month in person, and we look at every single franchisee's profit. Not their top line, the thing that we make money out of, their bottom line, to make sure that it hits a certain ratio. And if anyone is above that, what are they doing that we can, replicate elsewhere? And if they're below that, how do we help them to just get into that safety range? And I think it's so important. It's one of the things I learned out in the States, actually, just being really hyper aware of people's profitability. My very first podcast that I filmed was out in Phoenix, Arizona, with Greg Nathan. And he said to me, if you do nothing else but focus on franchisee profitability, you will run, a happy business, because everyone is happier when they're profitable. It's much more stressful when they're not. And that really resonated with me. I thought it's such a simple thing. Often, maybe that franchisee isn't looking at it, or they're not going to think about it until they do their year-end accounts and so on. And so we really promote people to do management accounts regularly, but our support team will also dig into Xero and work with them and look at that in meetings. If I'm ever going out to see a franchisee, my PA has a pack that she delivers to me, before I go out there, so I can prep for it and say, here's the kind of top line stuff that you need to be worried about. And, so we're, every touch point, we're talking about it. My expectation is the compliance person understands whether someone's profitable or not. The support people absolutely should know that. But even the marketing people, whatever, everyone in the business should understand, well, said franchisee is struggling, so everyone chimes in, because it's impactful for everyone. They're not going to make that compliance change because that change is going to cost them money. They're not going to make that investment in marketing because that's going to cost them money. And so everyone then understands why that conversation is happening the way it is. And so everyone's hyper-focused on making them profitable.